last week, the previous session, we looked at the key ethical concepts in Buddhism. Under this, we basically looked at punya, papa and kusala, akusala, good and evil, and also skillful or wholesome and unskillful or unwholesome. So these are the two sets of concepts we discussed in our previous session. In that discussion, basically I tried to show you the difference between these two sets of concepts. When we discuss punya and papa, basically we are discussing samsaric aspect. Punya we need for samsara, and then there is a need to be away from papa. However, this category of kusala and akusala is different. It's based on basically on psychological condition. Something, an act become kusala when you do it with alobha dosa moha, and then kusala, akusala when you do it with lobha dosa moha. So in that sense, there is a clear connection between a state of mind and also the action. Important question here is, because ordinary people are all worldlings, so puthujjana. Now, ordinary people always have lobha dosa moha in their mind, which means that the general behavior of ordinary person is always akusala. Right? Now, this is somewhat problematic, because you will think so we cannot live without akusala. The puthujjana or the ordinary life is always with akusala. Now here comes the basic distinction between punya, papa and kusala, kusala. Because basically lobha dosa moha is in our mind. So our general behavior is with lobha dosa moha. Ultimately, as Buddhists, we try to attain nirvana by getting rid of lobha dosa moha. So in a way, our ordinary life is guided by lobha dosa moha. But of course, it doesn't mean that ordinary life is papa. Okay? Papa leads you to apaya, but akusala leads you to sansara, but not necessarily to apaya. And kusala leads you out of sansara, punya leads you into sansara. You see the difference? So with punya, sansaric life will be comfortable, but still you are in the sansara. With papa, sansaric life will be uncomfortable and in the sansara. With akusala is also like that, but with kusala, you will be leading into out of sansara. So this basic distinction between the two categories was what we looked at basically in our last discussion. And then also we looked at whether, now we are sure that papa is always akusala. And then punya is, the problem is whether punya is always kusala. Because sometimes we perform punya activities even with lobha dosa moha. Now then what? So as ordinary people, even when we do punya acts, sometimes there can be lobha dosa moha. You see? So ultimately I think our conclusion was ordinary people's activities are always kind of mixed. Both kusala and nakusala. Right? Both kusala and nakusala. So in other words, all, we said all punya is, all kusala is not punya. All punya is not kusala. Because punya can have akusala aspects, right? when you look at these two categories, you can see, you must be able to see the connection, how the two categories are connected. So ultimately, the life committed to meritorious deeds may not be always a kusala. Sometimes it could be akusala. Now, papa is basically both papa and akusala. But akusala is not papa. As I said to you, you study in a college, and in order to get a degree, that is motivated by lobha. But of course, that is not a papa, right? And in our day-to-day life, most of the things we do are motivated by lobha. We do business, we earn money, all these things are lobha. But of course, so long as you do it in the right manner, it is not a papa. Okay? So in other words, simply with lobha dosa moha, you are not led to apaya. But with papa, you will be led to apaya. So, this is a subtle distinction between kusala and akusala, punya and papa. So, I think that is the main point I wanted to lay emphasis on in our last week discussion. Today, I will be moving to another subject. We will be, hold on. Okay, we will be moving to the subject of the foundations of Buddhist ethics. What we mean by this is the basis of Buddhist ethics. What I mean by basis is the reasons why we follow Buddhist ethics. Why do we call Buddhist ethics ethics? What is the also the criteria of ethics according to Buddhism. So all these issues are included when we discuss the foundations of Buddhist ethics. Like, we take Sila, but here we are going to the roots of Sila to see why Sila. When you observe Sila, we don't ask these questions. But of course, in ethical study, we try to look at the basis of Sila. On what basis, on what foundation is Buddhist ethics is based. Now, for example, just to understand, I will give you a different example. In a theistic tradition, believing in God, the belief is that ethics comes from God. So whatever God, does is good. So, basically ethics come from God. You remember in our last discussion on world religions, we raised this question whether something is good because God does it, or God does it because it is good. Now, these are two different possibilities. But if we believe that something is good because God does it, then of course, we believe that God is the source of ethics. God is the source of good and bad. So whatever God does is good. That means that it is the God or God's behavior that determines whether something is good or not. So accordingly that, we can say that according to theistic religious traditions, the foundation of ethics is God. Clear? So we can say ethics is good and bad is based on concept of God. So you believe in God, then of course everything falls into due places, no problem. But then as Buddhist, what is the basis we have? Do we say that Buddha is the basis of ethics or the foundation of ethics? Why we consider ethics to be ethics? So, in the theistic religion, you have an answer. Okay, God is the basis. So, therefore, if you believe in God, the ethics is ethics. Now, when we look at the Buddhist tradition, where there is no God, how are we going to understand the nature of ethics? On what basis do we accept Buddhist ethics? So, we will be looking at similar questions in this discussion. Now, in addition to moral prescriptions and precepts, in Buddhism there is an important aspect of moral reasoning. It tries to answer such questions as what is moral and why is moral. Now here, in addition to moral prescriptions or precepts, now in Buddhism when we say sila, we usually think about sikkhapada. We usually think about sikkhapada. Now ordinary people have 5 precepts, pancha sila. And then we have samanera sila, upasampada sila, dasa sila, atthanga sila. So we have all these precepts. So usually these are the things that come into our mind when we talk about precepts. So now in addition to these precepts in Buddhism, there is an important aspect of moral reasoning. Now remember these 2 words, moral reasoning. These 2 words are very important. Actually, when we study Buddhist ethics, what we really do is we are studying moral reasoning. What is meant by moral reasoning is, we are using reasoning. Reasoning means a logical activity, intellectual activity. Okay? So we are in ethics, in a study of ethics, we look at this aspect of reasoning. So the moral reasoning means we are using reasoning in order to understand the nature of morals, nature of ethics. Morality and ethics I use as synonyms in this discussion. So ethics or morality. So moral reasoning is something very interesting. You remember at the very beginning, I pointed out to a distinction between normative ethics and meta-ethics. This distinction is usually found in Western discussions of ethics. In the Western discussions of ethics, we refer to these 2 aspects. Now, one aspect is what we call normative ethics. The other is what I call meta-ethics. Now, normative ethics comes from norms. So, normative ethics means moral prescriptions, precepts, norms. This is good, this is bad. In Christian religion, 10 commandments. In Buddhism, pancha sila, dasa sila, samanera sila, upasampada sila. These things are normative ethics, norms. Okay. So, but then in addition to that, ethics talks about meta-ethics. Meta-ethics means a discussion about ethics. So, meta-ethics doesn't mean a set of prescriptions or something. Under meta-ethics, actually meta means beyond. Physics, metaphysics. Like in the same manner, ethics, meta-ethics. Now, meta-ethics means something beyond ethics. Namely, we are not talking about the precepts, we are talking about the nature of ethics. Now, for example, under normative ethics, we say don't kill. Under meta-ethics, we ask why should we not kill? What is wrong with killing? Now, that question belongs to meta-ethics. Do you see the difference? So, in other words, under normative ethics, we give a precept or sikkhapada or the rule. Under meta-ethics, we ask why this rule? What is the meaning of this rule? Who gave this rule? Why do we have to obey it? Now all that kind of questions come under metaethics. Does it make sense? Is that clear to you? So in fact, when we are discussing foundations of ethics, we are doing something like metaethics. Okay? We are looking at why ethics. What is the reason, the meaning of ethics? Why do you have to obey ethics? Now, not only about ethics, actually about any subjects, we can ask some questions about that subject. Now, ethics, we usually have precepts, but here we are asking some questions about them. Now, for example, about mathematics, we can ask the same question. Like in the school, we do maths. But then we can also ask, we say 2 plus 2 is 4. But then if you ask, how is it possible that 2 plus 2 is 4, then it becomes not mathematics, it is meta-mathematics. We are talking about mathematics. Okay? So like about any subject, you can ask some questions like that. Law, rules, we talk about law. But then if you ask, why law is valid? Why do you have to obey the laws? Now those questions, similar questions belong to meta, beyond that subject. Now, so that distinction we introduced at the very beginning of this discussion, normative ethics and meta-ethics. Actually, when we are talking about foundations of ethics, we are looking at somewhat like meta-ethics, okay? We look at the moral reasoning. It tries to answer such questions as, what is moral and why is moral? The first question, what is moral, concerns defining the concept of morality and providing criteria of morality. The second question concerns the justification of morality. Now again, there are two very important terms in this description. One is the defining or definition. The other is the justification. Now these two concepts are very important again in this discussion. One is the definition. Other is justification. You define a concept and also you justify the concept. Now definition is something we try to do in order to understand something. Okay? So we need to make something different from other objects. We need to distinguish one object from the others. We say cat and dog. If somebody has not seen a cat or dog in the whole life, how are you going to describe? How are you going to distinguish cat from dog? I'm sure it is not going to be easy. Today we don't find it difficult because all over the place there are dogs and also cats. So we don't need to define. We say this is dog, this is cat. But for a person who has not seen a cat or dog in the life, and where there are no cats and dogs around, then you have to define it. Okay, this is cat. And this is the difference between cat and dog. So cat is not dog, dog is not cat. So we are defining really, you see. And then of course that is in our day-to-day life, but when we go into the academic studies like ethics, here we try to, when we ask the question, what is moral or what is ethics, we have to define it. We have to say this is what it is. Okay? We have to say this is what it is. Now you remember in our discussion on Sila, we had two discussions on Sila. One is how the Sila was given in the discourses. And then the next discussion was how the Sila is described in the Visuddhimagga. I showed you there was a very important difference between these two accounts. Now in the discourses, you don't have definition of Sila. Simply Buddha goes into the Sila, described in Sila. Chulla Sila, Majjhima Sila, Maha Sila, Sopanati Pata Pativirato Hoti, Adinnadana Pativirato Hoti. Just directly goes into the Sila. You don't kill, you don't steal and so on. However, when we come to Visuddhimagga, it's so interesting. Visuddhimagga Sila start, King Silang. King Silang. What is Sila? Then Buddha Ghosha says Sila is this. Now you know that is the definition. You define, okay, this is what Sila means. And then subsequently we had Lakhana, Rasa, Pachupatthana, Padatthana. So you take any subjects in the Visuddhimagga, you have this fourfold category where you describe something, okay, what is it is Lakhana, what is this Rasa, Pachupatthana and Padatthana. Now you know these are ways of defining and also describing something. So here number one question, what is moral or what is ethics is a requirement, we are required to define it, say what it is. So it is a matter of definition, defining the concept and providing criteria of morality. The second question concerns the justification. Now justification means very interesting, again important. When we say don't kill, of course you accept it, but someone can ask why. Now if somebody asks this why question, then you have to give some answers, give some reasoning. Okay. I say don't kill, then other person asks why. What is wrong with killing? Why should I not kill? I say don't steal, take things from others. Why? So you know, then you answer this why question. That is a justification. You have to justify it. Okay. Now in fact, when we study ethics, really ethics is a part of philosophy, right? Yeah. Now the whole business of philosophy is really we provide definitions and justification, right? Because the issue is this. Now when we get commands, we don't ask for justifications. Now 10 commandments, command, they are commands. In an army, you have commanders. The commanders give commands, you don't question, you just do it, right? But then in philosophy and also in Buddhism, we know that we are not required to do things as somebody orders or command. We have to understand why we are doing it. Okay? As intelligent beings, we have to know why we are doing it. Okay, we are observing Sila. Why? For what reason? You remember I gave you this example. Okay, killing is bad, we know that. But running on the road laughing, what is wrong with that? Why it is given not to do for Upasampada monks? Running on the road laughing. This morning when I was coming in the car, I saw this very, very tiny monk with this huge arms ball running on the road. Very beautiful, you know. I thought I should take a picture. But you know, for a small guy like that, it's okay. But for a big monk running on the road will not be very good. But that will not be very good according to Vinay. But you can ask why. Why? What is wrong with that? Is it like killing somebody? Why it is Sila? Now we have to answer these questions. Now that is what is meant by justification. You have to say this is why you should not do it, you know. So you provide a justification. So here, when we talk about foundations of ethics, you know, we are looking at defining, describing precisely, and also justifying. Now these two are interconnected. In the Western ethical discussions, these and similar matters are covered under metaethics. Although in Buddhism a sharp distinction is not made alone with these lines, the discourses of the Buddha are full of both normative and metaethical considerations. Now when we study Buddhist Sila, actually we don't have two words like normative ethics and metaethics, right? We don't have two terms. But if you read Buddhist discourses, Buddha's discourses carefully, you can see that these two sections are available in the Buddhist tradition. Now, of course, I will describe to you later. You can see that you in Brahmajala Sutta, Samanya Pala Sutta, for example, Buddha gives Chulla Sila, Majjhima Sila, Mahasila. But in the Ambalattika Rahulovada Sutta, Buddha says, don't do anything if it harmful to you, harmful to other, harmful to both. Now what is that? Is that a Sila? That is not a Sila. That is actually a justification or explanation of why you should not do certain things. Now, for example, I said, what is wrong with killing? Sila says, don't kill. Then you ask, what is wrong with killing? Then go to Ambalattika Rahulovada Sutta, Buddha says, don't do something if it is not good for you, not good for the other, not good for both. Now you can answer that question. Somebody asks, what is wrong with killing? Killing is wrong because it is not good for the other. And when you kill somebody, it is not good for you. And it is not good for both you and the other. So you should not do that. Now there is a justification. Okay. Of course, sometimes even you can question about the justification. There is no end to it. But that's a different thing. But Sila requires, ethics requires some kind of justification. Okay. So in this discussion, I'm going to look at with you some of these issues. Okay. So some are connected to normative ethics, but most of the things are connected to meta-ethics and concerns issues related to what is moral, why we have to be moral, on what are the basis of morals, and issues like that. According to Buddhism, moral principles do not come from a divine or any other similar authority. The ultimate basis of morality is the informed conviction of oneself as a mature person. This matter is highlighted in the Kalama Sutta Anguttara Nikaya. Now, I think all of you see this point. So, according to Buddhism, the moral principles do not come from a divine or any other similar authority. Now, what it means is, I referred to you earlier, some people, particularly people believing in theistic religions, believe that moral principles come from God. So, because moral principles come from God, you don't question, you just obey them. Okay, this is the idea. But in Buddhism, interestingly, Buddhism doesn't believe in God. So, according to Buddhism, God doesn't exist. There is no such a person called God. So if there is no God, moral principles don't come from God. Then the issue is the ultimate basis of morality. What is it? Now, informed conviction of oneself as a mature person. What is this? Informed conviction of oneself as a mature person. We can simply say the basis of morals is your conviction. Conviction means your understanding. But of course, then we can question, can anybody and everybody be the judge of morality? Then of course, if there are 100 people in this hall, we have 100 moral authorities. So my morality is according to my conviction, your morality is according to your conviction. It will become chaos. Actually, if you look at carefully here, you can see informed conviction of oneself as a mature person. When you are a mature person, when you have a good sense of society and the world, as a mature person, if you feel something is good or something is bad, and that is the informed conviction. Informed conviction means it is not just your feeling, but it has to have some reasons. Okay, like we had earlier, why should we not kill? Okay, you should not kill because so and such and such and such. You give reasons, okay? So, informed conviction of oneself as a mature person. We will be seeing more into this later. So, basically, the basis of morality, ultimate basis of morality is the informed conviction of oneself as a mature person. Now, this is a very, very important and very difficult situation. I mean, if you say that, okay, morality coming from God, I mean, God is the perfect being, so it can't go wrong. But when you say that informed conviction of mature person, so you can be the mature person. Now, are you capable of judging what is moral or immoral? Isn't this a very big responsibility? How do we really judge what is moral or not if there is no God? Now, this is the Buddhist position has to be understood very carefully. But we will go on and then we will see how it works. Now, this matter is highlighted in the Kalama Sutta, Anguttara Nikaya. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Kalama Sutta. The Buddha says to Kalamas not to accept any moral statement on any of the following grounds. Not to accept any moral statement on any of the following grounds. One is revelation, continued tradition, number 2, number 3, textual tradition, number 4, hearsay, number 5, personal authority, samano no garu, this Ramana is our teacher, number 6, logicality, number 7, methodicalness, nahetu, number 8, reflection on the structure, akara parivitakka, Babbha Rupata, seeming possibility, and the last is agreement with one's own ditti, viyu ditti nijjhana kanti. Now, in this Kalama Sutta discussion, I think everybody knows Kalama Sutta. Kalama Sutta is so well known. Sometimes, this sutta is misunderstood. Sometimes people think that Kalama Sutta talks about whether something is true or false. We should reject these things. No, actually Kalama Sutta is basically ethical. In the Kalama Sutta, what is discussed is what is good and bad, not what is true or false, okay? Not something about the world, something about the morality, something about the moral judgment. So, that context of the Kalama Sutta has to be understood very clearly. Because the whole story of Kalama is, when the Buddha visits this village, this group of people, they say that different Sramanas and Brahmanas come to their village, and so one Sramana comes and say, this is what is good and this is bad. And the next day somebody else come and say, this is good and this is bad. They say that so many people say so many things to be good and bad, so we are confused. Now the question about Kusala and Nakusala, what is good and bad? Okay? Not about what is true or what is false. So there is a very clear distinction between these two categories. So Kalama say to the Buddha, different people come to our village and one person says this is true, next person says that no, that is false, not good, and this is good. So they say that we are confused. How do we know? Then Buddha begins with saying, but another thing, this is only the beginning of Kalama Sutta. Unfortunately, many people don't read beyond this. Actually, Kalama Sutta this is just the beginning. There is another whole lot of other things in the Kalama Sutta. You need to read the entire sutta to understand. But Buddha begins with, Buddha says, don't accept based on any of these things. Actually, if you examine carefully, I am not going to do one by one, but basically you have like Anussava, revelation. Now, Anussava, it comes, the Indian tradition, Shruti. Shruti means what is heard. That means divine revelation. What you heard from God. In other words, Shruti means the Veda. Indian tradition, they thought that Veda is revealed, what is revealed by gods to the Brahmins. So, Shruti, the concept. Now, Shruti means authority. Earlier we had the God as the authority. The same thing, similar thing here. Shruti is what you hear from gods. So revelation, revealed literature. So in Sanskrit language we use the word Shruti. Shruti, okay. So Shruti. Shruti means what is heard. It comes from Shravana. Shravana means Savana, Shravana, Shruti. So revelation. and then continue tradition, textual tradition, because it is in the book and hearsay. And then starting from personal authority. If it is not in the tradition, then you rely on a person. Somebody says this is good, then you accept it. Okay. Now that type of personal authority. Then towards the end you have logic, method, takka hetu, naya hetu. So in other words, these 10 can be summarized into some are based on what is called authority. Authority can be personal authority, or authority can be textual authority, either way. And then the other thing is logic. So you have logicality. So the authority and logic basically means reasoning. So Buddha says simply because something is textual authority or God or any other personal authority, don't accept. And then simply because something is logical, methodical, don't accept. Because something methodical can be still false, still not right. So the methodicalness and reflection on the structure, akar parivitakka, seeming plausibility, babba rupata, you look at something, you hear something, oh it looks okay, so you accept it. Buddha says no, don't do that. And then finally agreement with one's own view. So something is agreeable to you, then you accept it. But that doesn't mean again that is the right thing to do. So here Buddha says, Buddha lists these 10 things. These are the kind of popularly in the society, people believed things based on these things. So that is why Buddha says, don't accept things on these different grounds. So simply because your religious text says, or any other authority says. But we need to understand this again carefully. This does not mean that all these sources are wrong. What it says is, you cannot rely completely on those things. What the authority says can be true, but then you have to know it independently. You don't accept simply because it is said by the authority. You don't accept simply because it is in the book. Because we have a lot of respect for books. So whatever written in the books, we tend to accept. And particularly whatever the religious text, we never question. But religious texts can be misprints and wrongly interpreted, wrong translations. There can be many problems. So simply because something is in the book, Buddha says you must not accept. But that doesn't mean that what is in the book is wrong necessarily. It could be right or it could be wrong. What is said by the authorities also could be right or could be wrong. So simply because it is said by the authority or simply because it is in the book, you must not accept. Independently, you must check that. Okay? So don't think that Buddha is rejecting these things completely. No. What he says is, not in the Kalama Sutta, in other suttas, Buddha say that these things could be either true or false, either good or bad, either right or wrong. So, could go in either way. Because that two-way possibility is there, Buddha says that you have to check. So, simply not to accept things based on these things. Now, here something very, very interesting and important emerging from this. What is it? Namely, Buddha gives a very important responsibility in the moral reasoning to the person. Because usually we go by the religious authority. If the religion says, yes. Or we go by the book. If it is in the book, yes, we accept. But Buddha says, don't accept by the book. Don't accept by the religious authority. Now, then he goes on describing, explaining on what ground we should accept. But then we have to see that, this is in a way assigning huge responsibility to us. Moral reasoning moral decisions we have to make. But you know, in our experience is if somebody else make decisions on behalf of us, life is easy, isn't it? Rather than we make our own decisions, if somebody else make decisions for us, life is easy. When we are small children, our parents make decisions for us. Whether we like it or not, we go by it. And then sometimes our teachers make decisions for us. Whether we like it or not, we go by that. In a way it is easy because you don't have to make decisions. Somebody else is making decisions. Now in religions also this is the case. In God-centered religion, you leave the decision making to God. You don't use your reasoning, you are not bothered. So what God says, what the book says that God said it, you just accept and do that. You are not thinking. In the Buddhist tradition also we can say that, okay, you don't think. What the book say that Buddha said, you do it without any questioning, right? But you know, that is not really the Buddhist way. Of course, we are doing what the Buddha said, but we have to have our own reasoning to do that. Otherwise, we must be convinced that what the Buddha said is good. Okay? So the issue is that it doesn't mean that what the Buddha says is wrong, but it means that we have to have our own conviction about it. Okay? Now, you know, this is something important because at some point about your own religion, you have to be, you have to have your own judgment. Now, it is like this. As a small children, you got into the monkhood. You become Siales very often as a small. You don't understand. But in your life, at some point, you have to understand why you did that. Right? You have to find your own reasoning. I mean, first you did because your teacher said that. Or your mother wanted to be a monk. Or mother wanted to be a Siale. But then, after some time, you question yourself, why? Then you must have a good reason to continue with it. You have to have your own understanding. Okay? So to begin with, we do things like small children, we do things because you know we don't understand. We just say, we just do whatever our parents say. However, when we become adults, we see that okay, this is why my father said this to me. This is why he sent me to school. Maybe when you are a very small child, going to school is very, very difficult thing, very bad thing. You don't want to do. But simply you go to school and study because you are scared of your father. But when you become an adult, you are not scared of your father anymore. Then you see, this is why my father sent me to school. It was good that I obeyed him and went to school. Right? You see it later. In other words, you have to find your own reasoning for your life at some point. Now at that point, you are a mature person. Okay? Now at that point, you are capable of making your own moral judgments. That is what the Buddha meant. You know, later we will come across this term, Vinyu Purisa, intelligent person. Now once you become a mature person, intelligent person, you see the meaning of, you know, certain things you did. Or you see the certain things you did were wrong. But anyhow, you have to find your own reasoning. Okay? So the meaning of the Kalama Sutta is not to reject all these things in totality, but to see that they are limited. What is in the books are limited. You have to see the reasoning behind it. You have to have a conviction about it. Then you can do that. Okay? So it is something like that. So to understand Kalama Sutta in a proper context, okay, Buddha says to reject these things, but at the same time we have to understand when you reject these things, there's a huge responsibility coming to you. Right? Otherwise, these agencies take care of your moral judgment. Okay, book says, tradition says, God says, Buddha said. So nothing to worry, you just do it. But then you are not using your reasoning. However, you are using your reasoning means It's a huge responsibility to you, right? In a way, actually it is very difficult to understand why Buddhism can be, how Buddhism can be popular. Buddhism can't be popular because, Buddhism gives us such a responsibility to you. You have to decide what to do. But in other religions, somebody else decide what to do. You just do it. Very easy. But this responsibility is very difficult. If we understand it properly, it is a very difficult responsibility because you are your own decision maker. You are your own decision maker. Okay, we will be seeing more about it later. For the time being, simply Kalama Sutta is very important because this provides some kind of basis for Buddhist morality. When morality says don't do this or do this, very often we do based on these things, revelation, tradition, authority and these things. But Buddha says no, don't do on those things. However, important thing is then we have to find why we should do these things. If we are not accepting these things, then what are the reasoning? Okay. So, therefore it is important to understand this thing very in the proper context. In this analysis, 3 factors are rejected as criteria of moral judgment. We already saw that. Authority, textual law, personal logic and personal emotions. Personal emotions, actually I did not mention that. Authority, logic and personal emotions is Babbharupata. Babbharupata means, Samano no Garu, this is my teacher. So you do that because you love your teacher. I mean, you don't use your reasoning, you just do it because you like your teacher. You rely on your teacher. And then Babbharupata is last aspect. When you look at something, it looks all right, it looks good, it looks appealing. You like it, so you do that. But your liking alone is not enough. So emotionally you may be attracted to something, but whether it is good or bad has to be decided differently. Okay? It's like taking food. For certain food we like, but maybe that food is not good for you. That food is very tasty, but still then it is not good for your health. So, it's something like that. Babbharupata means you look at it and then it looks okay, but simply because of that you should not accept. So, these are the 3 things: authority, logic and personal emotions. The Buddha's proposed way of deciding what is moral or immoral is whether or not any act is motivated by craving, anger and delusion. Lobha, dosa, moha. Now here Buddha gives the criterion. Buddha says, don't simply accept because of these 10 things, and then on what basis should you decide? Then Buddha says it is based on the Buddha's proposed way of deciding what is moral and immoral, so whether it is lobha, dosa, moha. Look at this is what Buddha says. Now Kalamas, when a man is greedy, is overcome by greed, when his mind is completely swayed by greed, does he not kill a living creature, take what is not given, commit adultery, tell lies, and induce others too to commit deeds that would conduce to disadvantage and unhappiness for a long time? Now Buddha asked this question from Kalamas. Kalamas, what do you think? When you have lobha, wouldn't you killing somebody because of your lobha? Wouldn't you stealing somebody's thing? They said, yes. When we have lobha, we will do these things. Then Buddha asked, is that okay to do that? Is that good for you? Is that good for the other? Now suppose you are killing somebody, certainly it is not good for the other, right? And then, is it good for you? Killing a person is not good for you either. So, Buddha says, if you do something with lobha, do you see that you do wrong things? Those things are wrong because they are not good for you, they are not good for the other. Now Kala must say yes. Now Buddha goes on like that about lobha, dosa, moha. Now here you see the procedure is this. Now Kala must finally accept, yes, if you do something with lobha, dosa, moha, it is not good. Now, why Kalamas accepted that? Is it simply because Buddha said that? Is it because Buddha said that? No, Buddha demonstrated it. Buddha showed it to these people. So Buddha's approach was different. So finally Kalamas accepted, if you do something with Lobha Dosa Moha, that is wrong. But that is not because Buddha said it, because they saw it. But Buddha of course persuaded them. Buddha showed them. But of course Kalamas saw it. You see the difference? When you get it from the tradition, when you get it from God, you don't see these things, you just accept. Because you trust God, so you accept it. You trust your teacher, you accept it. But here, Kalamas begin with saying that we don't have a religious teacher. We don't believe in any religion. So, this is a very classic story. Kalamas didn't have any accepted religion. Kalamas did not have any preferred religious teacher. Now, in that sense, you can say that Kalamas were kind of free group of people. Now here, Buddha shows them when you do something with Lobha Dosa Moha, that is not good, okay. So this conversation goes on. So in fact, you must read the Kalama Sutta completely, okay. Then you will see this moral reasoning. In fact, Kalama Sutta, I mentioned moral reasoning at the beginning. Kalama Sutta is one of the greatest examples of moral reasoning, not only in Buddhism, actually across any religions in the world. You don't find this kind of discussion. I'm saying it not because it is Buddhism, but simply when you look at the religious literature, you don't find this kind of discussions. When they say that we don't have any religion, Buddha would have said, okay, forget about it. But Buddha didn't say that. Buddha said, that's fine. Let's talk. So, it is a remarkable event in the history of religion, where Buddha sits down with them and then brings this group of people into ethical acceptance. Now, one of the most important things in this discussion is, does Buddha ask them to become followers of the Buddha? No. No condition. And then, Lobha Dosa Moha, do they belong to any particular religion? No. Lobha Dosa Moha are the characteristics of ordinary human being, whether you belong to this religion or that religion. Okay? Now the importance of Kalama Sutta is, actually you can see that this entire discourse nothing to do with Buddhism even. Buddha doesn't say that, oh, you have to have saddha, you have to have belief, Four Noble Truths, no, nothing like that. Actually, Buddha talks to this group of people who say that they don't have a religion. Buddha says, fine. But you don't have to have a religion. You don't need to be a member of a religion in order to be good. I mean, this is a remarkable ethical discussion in that sense. Because in many religions, for example, in the theistic religion, if you are not a believer in God, forget about it. I mean, no further conversation, right? Because you have to believe first. But here the interesting thing is, they say that they don't believe in anything. Buddha says, fine, no problem. But then he goes on discussing, and here you can see that ultimately Buddha gets these people to see that Lobha Dosa Moha is not very good. So ultimately they accept what the Buddha says, but not simply because Buddha says, but they see it. And then Buddha, the procedure is Buddha asks questions. It's not like Buddha giving a grand sermon. This is a conversation. Buddha talks to them. Buddha asks questions, and then they answer. This Buddha's method is a dialogue. Now, dialogue itself is indicative that there is no distance between the speaker and the other person. Okay? Now, if you sit in higher place and talk to people, then it comes from up to down, right? You are just looking at like this. Say yes. You can't do anything other than that, right? But here, the discussion goes between dialogue. Dialogue means by definition two people talking. When two people are talking, two are equal partners. This again is another very, very significant aspect of Buddhist ethical discourse. So Buddhist ethics for that matter doesn't come from high up to down. I mean, you are like this. No, it's not like that. You are on equal footing. You talk. No. So Buddha talked to these people. Buddha asked questions and they respond. So it's a conversation. It's a dialogue. It's a discussion between two people, two groups of people. So, there is some kind of parity, some kind of equality here. Of course, Buddha is higher in his understanding, it's true. You can see that Buddha masterfully, guide these people to the point he wants them to take. But that's a different thing. But Buddha does it in a very skillful manner so that, they don't even feel that. But of course, Buddha knows what he is doing. Okay? Buddha knows where to take this group. But of course, he does it in such a way, he does it in a very open and democratic way. You ask questions, they answer, it goes like that. So if they want, they can disagree because they don't believe in any religion. But this reasoning is so compelling, you can't be going against it. So this kind of discussion goes on. So Buddha says, look at it, when you are guided by lobha, this is what you do. When you are guided by dosa, this is what you do. When you are guided by moha, this is what you do. This is not good. Don't you see that? In this statement of the Buddha, there is a reference to 3 morally bad psychological states and the unpleasant state resulting from them. You know that. Okay. We'll continue. In the Buddhist understanding of action, cetana or the intention plays a crucial role. Cetanahang bhikkhave kammang vadami. All of you know that. Nibbedika Pariyaya Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, where Buddha says, in fact, karma is cetana. What it means is, in order for something to be an action, it has to have a motive. If you don't have a particular intention or motive, it doesn't become an action, or it doesn't become that particular action. For example, you do something accidentally, touch this, it is not action, it is an accident. So difference between, in other words, action and happening. Okay? Happening means something happens, you are not responsible for it. Wind blows, but the branches of trees are broken. That is not an action. No one is responsible for it. You are not responsible for it. So things can happen without your intention. That is a happening. But action is something you intend it to do. Okay? There are 2 aspects of that. Without intention, action doesn't happen. And without a particular intention, particular action doesn't happen. For example, there is a story, the one during the time of the Buddha, one monk went to a house and, he sat on a chair. But in that chair, there was a small child, hidden under the cover. And then the child died. But then did he have the intention to kill a child? No. So it is not a murderous action as a result of that. There was. But nevertheless, it is an action because you sat down purposefully. But so you sitting down purposefully, so that is the action. But of course, it is not a murderous action because he did not have the intention to kill. Do you see the difference? So action doesn't become action without cetana. And action doesn't become a particular action without particular cetana. Clear? You do something and as a result somebody gets injured. But if you didn't have an intention to injure anybody, you are not guilty of injuring somebody. So the cetana. Now in the Buddhist understanding, action is very important because that's a crucial thing. In the well-known Dhammapada verse, Mano Pubbangama Dhamma, everybody knows, the primacy of mental state is in determining the good or bad actions is stress. You know, in Dhammapada beginning, Mano Pubbangama Dhamma, Mano Setta Manomaya, Manasache Paduttena. If the defiled mind, you do something, Tato Nang Dukkhamanveti, suffering comes behind you. Manasache Pasannena Basativa Karotiva, if you do it with a good mind, Sukhamanveti, happiness comes. So, you know, basically, whether something is good or bad depends on Mano Pubbangama Dhamma. So, the Mano or the Chetana is very important. Now, that is one thing. When we are talking about the basis of foundations of Buddhist moral action, I think one of the fundamental thing is action is based on intention. So, you have to have, initially, you have to have an intention for something to be an action. Secondly, you have to have a particular intention for that action to be a particular action, okay? So, two different stages of the same thing. So, the action. You have to have relevant mentality. This is pretty much common sense. Now, if you take modern legal tradition, in the legal tradition, this is the fundamental thing. Whether you committed some crime is whether you had the intention to do that. If you didn't have the intention to do that, then you are not guilty of committing that crime. So, that is the criminology. But here the basic concept of karma, something becomes an action. I mean, you are morally responsible. Your moral responsibility, what is the limitation of your moral responsibility? Now, in my earlier story, this monk sat on the chair. I mean, his responsibility is to account for the sitting on the chair. But he doesn't have a moral responsibility simply because the child died. Because his moral, action didn't have that particular intention to kill somebody, you know. So, this distinction of having an intention and having a particular intention, both are very important things as the basis of. Now, we will move to the second thing. The other aspect highlighted is the outcome of such an action, deeds that would conduce to disadvantage and unhappiness. Now, in this Dhammapada stanza also, you have this, Tatonang Dukkhamanveti. As a result of that, unhappiness comes to you. Tatonang Sukhamanveti. As a result of this, happiness comes to you. So, you have action and then something comes as a result of that. Now, you know, this idea, the second aspect, consequence, is a very important factor to be taken into consideration when deciding whether an action is good or otherwise. Now, consequence. Consequence is very important. Number one was intention is important. Number two is consequence. When you do something, what will be the result of this action? What will be the result of this action? So, that conviction, the consequence of action, we will see how Buddha describes this. Okay, now consequence can be seen in two different manners. One thing is, you know, everybody knows about the karma. Karma and its result determined by the nature of the action. It's another very important instance of Buddhist emphasis on consequence of action. Now, everybody knows karma theory, karma and vipaka. Actually, karma and vipaka is elaborated description or the teaching on how your actions affect you. Now, particularly when we look at karma and consequence, karma and vipaka, we usually think about karma and vipaka we get after the death in the samsara. However, I think we need to understand this karma and result, karma and vipaka is not only for next birth, okay? Karma and vipaka is also for this birth. Whatever you do, you have a consequence for that. So, karma and vipaka, not as popularly understood, it is not only for the next world. Karma and vipaka is also applicable to this world. So I'm not going to give you a long account of karma here and the vipaka here, but initially you can see that whether anything is good or bad to be decided on its consequence. Now earlier we discussed punya papa, kusala kusala, right? Punya papa and kusala kusala. Now something becomes papa because it is a bad thing for society, bad thing for you. And then you say killing is papa. You know why killing is papa? It is not good for the killer. It is not for the, the subject, who is being object to be killed. Stealing, misconduct in the sexual behavior, telling lies, telling gossip, and all these things come in that category. So the papa and also punya, you do certain good things, and then it is even clearer when it comes to kusala and akusala. Kusala is alobha dosa moha. Those are your intentions. With your alobha dosa moha, you do something and it becomes kusala. And then lobha dosa moha, it becomes akusala. So karma and its result is a very important aspect. And then there is so much details on karma, which I am not going to discuss with you because you are familiar with that. But keep in mind, when we refer to the consequence of actions, on the one hand we are talking about karma and vipaka. But I want to move into other things, because when we talk about karma and vipaka, we basically think about the next life. But actually what is important is, or equally important is, how karma and karma vipaka affects you in this life. Now look at these two things. In the Bahitika Sutta Majjhima Nikaya, Anandathera characterizes harmful sabbyapajja acts as those censured by the religiously advanced people, Samana Brahmana, and the intelligent people Vinyu, and non-harmful abhyapajja as good. Now in this discussion, Venerable Ananda gives three criteria. Of course, something to be harmful, sabbyapajja acts. Now sabbyapajja acts are censured by Sramana and Brahmana, religiously advanced people, and also Vinyu Purisa. And if action is non-harmful, that is abhyapajja as good. So bad act is sabbyapajja, good acts are abhyapajja. One way to determine will be whether these acts are approved or disapproved by Samana Brahmana, religious people, religiously advanced people, and also Vinyu Purisa. Now this Vinyu Purisa is another very, very important concept in the Buddhist ethical reasoning. Buddha refers to very often to Vinyu Purisa. And earlier I said, if you don't accept any of these 10 things in the Kalama Sutta, you have to decide what is good and what is bad. But then who are you? You have to be Vinyu Purisa. Anybody and everybody can't do that. If you are a small child, Buddha doesn't say that you can be a moral authority of you. No, small children have to be guided. And what about adults? Grown-up people. But do all grown-up people are really grown-up people? Maybe you spend 10, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years in your life. But does that mean that you are really a mature person, grown-up person? No. Maybe some people are really, their biological age is 40, but their moral reasoning age may be 10. Isn't it? We have, that we have biological age, right? So everybody has biological age from the date you are born. But your intellectual age, your moral reasoning age can be different. Like there can be some people like 15 years old, but their moral reasoning and intellectual age can be 30, very high. Even you are a small child, boy. You have seen many cases like that, right? Some children, when they are 10, 12, 13, 14, they are doing unbelievable, marvelous things. So that means that their biological age is so low, but their intellectual age is so high. Now, if you take the moral reasoning, actually moral reasoning is also something like that. Your biological age can be one, but your moral reasoning age can be different. Whether you are young or old, it really doesn't matter. Now, when you say Vinyu Purisa, you have to understand this very carefully. Vinyu Purisa means a mature person. Now, who is the mature person? It's not very easy to define who the mature person is. Now, here Buddha goes to Kalamas. Buddha treats Kalamas to be mature people, right? Don't you see that? Buddha seems to be thinking, Buddha treats Kalamas to be mature people. That is why Buddha says to Kalamas, don't accept because this and this and this and this. Accept if you feel that it is good. But then, Buddha gives such a huge responsibility to these people. Kalamas. I mean, they have to be their own judges. But, then that means that Buddha accepted them to be mature people. Unless you are mature, you can't, undertake that moral responsibility. So here you have this characterization, something to be harmful and also censured by the religiously advanced people and also Vinyu. Now, it's interesting. Now, something to be, something which has been censured by religiously advanced people and also Vinyu Purisa. Of course, an act will not be made harmful act simply because other people say that. It also has to be sabhyapajya. Sabhyapajya, abhyapajya. It comes from vyapada. That means sabhyapajya means really harmful act. Killing is a sabhyapajya act because somebody gets killed. Harming is a sabhyapajya act. Stealing is sabhyapajya. So you have to really look at the the nature of this thing. Injuring somebody is a sabhyapajya act. But if you are a medical doctor who is doing a surgery, you also injure, shed blood. But of course, that is not considered to be a sabhyapajya or wrong act, right? Because a medical doctor is also cutting pieces of you. But it is not a wrong act. But then, of course, if somebody else cut pieces of you, then it can be a sabhyapajya. So, it depends on many factors. Sometimes the nature of the action, but not merely the nature of the action, intention of the action, and then how the society looks at. Morally mature, advanced society looks at. How does it society looks at? Vinyu Purisa, Sramana Brahmana, how do they look at it? So Venerable Ananda goes into that, and Venerable Ananda says these things are wrong. Now, this criterion has been made more elaborately given by the Buddha in the Ambalattika Rahulovada Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya. Accordingly, an action leading to the harm of oneself, the other, and both oneself and the other is bad. Pali terms are Attabhyabadhaya Samvattati, Parabhyabadhaya Samvattati, Ubhayabhyabadhaya Samvattati, Akusalantang Kammans, Dukkudriyang, and so on. It goes on in the discourse. The good action is one that does not lead to the harm of oneself, the other, and both oneself and the other. Now, this is something very interesting and important. What is said by the Venerable Anand in the Bahitika Sutta, Buddha elaborates more in the Ambalattika Rahulovada Sutta. Now, in the Rahulovada Sutta, this criterion is again very important. Buddha asks the question, what is the bad act? Buddha says to Rahula, Pacchavekkitva Rahula Kayena Kammang Katabban. Pacchavekkitva Rahula Vachaya Kammang Katabban. Pacchavekkitva Rahula Manasa Kammang Katabban. Rahula Pacchavekkitva, having reflected very carefully. Pacchavekkana. Pacchavekkati, that's the word. So having reflected very carefully, you have to do your physical acts, you have to do your verbal acts, you have to do your mental acts. Pacchavekkana. Then what is the Paccavakkana? How to reflect on that? Then Buddha says, if any action is not, harmful to you, not. If any act is harmful to you, to the other person, to both, then that action is wrong. Don't do that. And then the opposite is, Buddha says that if any action is not harmful to you, not harmful to the other person, not harmful to you and the other person both. Actually, I will come to this point later. Buddha says to you, to the other, and Buddha says to both. There is a very important significance of this, including both oneself and other. To that point I will come later. But here you can see you look at the consequence. Buddha look at the consequence. Buddha says to Rahula, don't do something if this is like that. Now do you see there is a clear difference between this moral reasoning and what is mentioned in the Kalama Sutta? In the Kalama Sutta, Buddha says, don't accept something to be, if it is coming from God or from the book. But then what is this? Now Buddha says this. Why should Rahul accept it? In the Kalama Sutta, Buddha said, don't accept simply because your teacher says. Now in this case, Buddha is Rahula's father and also Buddha is Rahula's teacher. Right? Why Rahula has to accept it? Simply because Buddha says? No. Important thing is, if some action is harmful, you know it. Buddha doesn't have to say that to you. Nobody has to say that to you. You know if something is inflicting pain to you, harmful to you. So it is your own conviction. Buddha shows to Rahula, look, Paccavakkhitta, you have to reflect very carefully. When you reflect very carefully, you know that something is not good when you do that. To you, to the other. So the moral reasoning is something very interesting here. You reject all these things as said in the Kalama. But how can you reject your own understanding? You go by your own understanding. When Buddha says this is not harmful, of course, Rahula accepts that not because Buddha says that. You feel, you know that, if somebody kills you, you know that that is not good for you. If that is not good for you, you must not also kill somebody else. That's bad for the other. Now you see this whole idea of consequence is something very, very important. Now let me move into the last point quickly. Owing to this emphasis on consequence of action, the scholars say that Buddhism advocates a consequentialist approach to ethics. Refer to R.D. Premasiri and Damien Keown. In this book you have this particular discussion by R.D. Premasiri. So I am stopping this discussion at this point, but I want you to read this entire book. This is a very small book, but there is a discussion particularly on this point, 3-4 pages. So please read that when you come, okay? When you come next week to this discussion, please read the whole book. If you can't read the whole book, at least read the relevant section on this. Then I will have a more discussion with you on this concept, idea that consequence. Because you go by the consequence. But then if you look at carefully, if you simply go by the consequence, it can pave way to some other problems. What are these problems? So you have to think about it, okay? Now, I know that you are not talking very much in this class, but I want you to think, okay? I want you to really think about these things, how can you accept it, okay? So, let me wind up my discussion for today. What I try to do in the discussion is today, we looked at basically the foundations or the basis of Buddhist morality. Or in other words, on what basis Buddhism talks about morality. Now this discussion we saw that it relates to what's called meta-ethics, basically matters of defining something and also justification. Now up to this point what we did is an exercise in justification of ethics. You say something is good, then you have to say why you say that it is good. You say something should be done, you have to explain why you have to do that. So you have to provide the justification, okay. Now here Buddha provides justification. Now, interestingly, very importantly, you can see that Buddha is really, respecting his listener very much. Buddha doesn't say, do this, do this, do this. Buddha doesn't give a list here. Okay? It is not a list. Buddha says, Rahula, think very carefully. So Buddha doesn't say what to do or what not to do really. I mean, you can give a list like Sikkhapada, but Buddha didn't do that here. Buddha simply gives the criteria. So whatever you do, if it is harmful to you, so like that. You can see it's a very broad basis, okay? So I think you got this point. I want you to read this relevant section, and in our next discussion I will be continuing from this point. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Do you have any questions or comments or anything? Okay, come on, the silence is very loud. Okay, go ahead.
Question.
Okay,
Let's say the concept connected with Lobha, Dosa, Moha
Yeah.
are immoral. I want to ask you, nowadays most of teacher and most of teacher find his pupil and punish his pupil and to be a clever person. But as the body is connected with the dosa. Although the teacher know this one is connected with the dosa, why do they do?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Venerable's question is, we refer to Lobha, Dosa, Moha, and then we refer to them as Akusala. But then his question is, sometimes teachers ask their students to be competitive, and of course you compete, then in other words, in the teacher's instruction is to be really increase your Lobha, Dosa, Moha. How it is possible? That's an important question. In fact, when you look at the education system today, we are encouraging students to be competitive. So the world is considered to be a competitive place. So you compete with others and you win, you defeat others. This is the mentality. I think, Venerable, your observation is very correct. Because when you're really in competition with somebody, when you try to defeat the others, you are really motivated by Lobha, Dosa, Moha. The question is whether it is right or wrong. Now, when we look at this, the society, it is on the one hand, we have to motivate the children to do their best. But in order to motivate the children to do their best, what we do is we create a competition between the people. But that competition, you compete with the other person, sometimes you do the right thing, sometimes you do the wrong thing. Through the right or wrong thing, you want to win. That mentality is not a good mentality. And anybody knows that, that is not the type of mentality that you should develop among the children. Because, these children should be living in the world, sharing this world, not destroying others. So, Venerable, your observation is very correct. We have to really look at the education system very critically. Very critically. Because the Buddhist position, at least, Buddhist position is not that. I will give you one example. In the Patimokkha, you have this word, Anyamanya Vachanena, Anyamanya Vutthapanena. What is this? Anyamanya Vachanena. You support mutually. Anyamanya Vutthapanena. I fall down, you help me to get up. You fall down, I help you to get up. What is this? Now this competition, you fall down, I jump over you and I go. But that is wrong. That is wrong, So, Reverend is true. The modern education system, modern society is based on the competition. But we must find a way to, I mean, what is the meaning of competition? You give the competition so that, children can really maximize their possibility. But there must be a way to maximize the talent without getting into competition. By being very kind, by being very nice to the other person, but still you can be an excellent person, right? Isn't it? In a classroom, you can be helping others, other students, but still you can be the excellent. But very often you don't help the others, you don't support any other person, you think you must be the first in the class. But that mentality is wrong. That mentality is more motivated by Lobha Dosa Moha. Actually, entire education system, in order to get a better job, better salary, is motivated by Lobha Dosa Moha. But even within that, you must be able to do it as less harmful as possible. Particularly in the society, accepted principle is you compete with others. Necessarily others are defeated if you win, or if they win, you are defeated. The mentality is not good. Jayang verang pasavati dukkhang seti parajito. If you got defeated, you sleep very sadly. And then if you win, others become jealous of you. The best thing is, you help others. Some time ago I saw in a nice picture in some kind of, this para-Olympic or something where disabled people go for Olympic. So the competition was 100 meters or something running, and then disabled people are running. In the course of that, one runner, girl, fell down. You know what the others did? They all came back to her and stood her up and held her hand, ran together. Now, to whom goes the gold medal? So they did that. They held the hand of that girl and they ran together. I mean, that's a remarkable example. But usually what happens is you fall down, others jump over you and go, others don't care about you. But I think the meaning of Buddhism is we must be able to change this outlook in the world. Thank you for the question, Reverend. Yes, ma'am. Good.
Can we say ethics and morality are the same or no? Why?
Okay, your question is ethics and morality. Actually, that is a question about the two terms. When we use these two terms, there are certain differences, but in my discussion in this class, I'm using both terms synonymously. I mean, ethics, morality in the same sense. However, the two have two meanings. When you say morality basically we are talking about what is the good behavior. But when we say ethics is not only good behavior. Ethics has several senses. One sense is, for example, ethics is the professional behavior. Say, for example, if you are a medical doctor, there are certain things you can do with your patient and certain things you don't do with your patient, right? So, but that is the medical ethics. But when you come out from medical practice, you don't have to observe that. So that means professionally, when you are in a particular job, that ethics belong to that job. So that's a narrow meaning of ethics, but we are using that also as ethical meaning. So the ethics can be having many meanings. Ethics is the philosophical study of good and bad. That's one idea. Ethics is a particular professional ethics. So like that, ethics is in a way you can say much broader. So ethics also can include what we consider to be what is the right behavior. But when we say morality, basically we are talking about not the professional ethics or anything. Morally, that means the behaviorally, how do you behave in the society. So moral behavior, immoral behavior. So in a somewhat little bit narrow sense than ethics, but of course much focused when you say morally and immorally. So, but usually in textbooks on ethics, you find these two terms interchangeable. So yeah, it depends on the context. Okay, we will wind up for today. Then afternoon we will be meeting to discuss world religions. Thank you.